Hi everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be my second quarterly reading wrap up of the year so far. So basically just a wrap up of all the books that I've read in April, May and June. In the last 3 months I've read 13 books, and I do have quite a few DNFs as well, so books that I started and didn't finish. One of the most upsetting ones for me is actually over here, and I've still got my bookmark in it, but it's The Dark Forest by Saoirse Liu. I'm really sad about this because I loved The Three Body Problem last year. It was one of my favourite books of the year. It's quite a hard sci-fi series, but for some reason this just really worked for me. I was so interested in it. This one I was struggling so hard. I'm pretty sure I started reading this at the start of this year, and it's taken me 6 months to DNF it, almost 300 pages in, and it's just not the same. It wasn't giving me the same feeling. It didn't have the same sort of magic that I loved from the first one. It was very slow. We're following a completely different character who I just did not like, really. There was this whole side story about how he has a imaginary dream wife, and I was just getting really fed up, and I did ask on my Instagram, is it worth ploughing on with this? I ended up just looking how the rest of the series was going to go, and I honestly can't believe that this book is as long as it is, because it doesn't really seem to go anywhere spectacular. So unfortunately I am going to be DNFing this series as a whole, which is very sad because I did buy all the books in this series, including a short story collection. I think it's such a shame because, like I said, I absolutely adored this one, but The Dark Forest, you were just not it for me. Next, we have Doppelganger by Naomi Klein. This one I started listening to on audiobook, and I was finding it kind of interesting. I don't really know anything about Naomi Klein. I've never read any of her books before. She talks a lot about the shock doctrine in this book, which I've never read. I did have it on my TBR. I just don't really think I'm interested in those topics enough to read about it. It was coming across a little bit jumbled. It was meant to be a book about Naomi Klein being constantly mixed up with another woman called Naomi Wolf, who started off as a feminist author and then turned into a COVID conspiracy theorist. And I think it was supposed to be about how that could happen to somebody, but also mixing it in with other doppelganger stories, and it just wasn't clicking. It felt very personal to this author, and I just didn't see why I should be massively interested in that. So yeah, I've ended up putting that one down. I probably got about 20% into this one, and I have removed the shock doctrine from my TBR because I'd rather just not right now. And then the next two were ones I borrowed from the library, so I don't have them with me anymore. But the first one was Coup de Grâce, I don't know how you say it, by Sophia Adram. I didn't get very far into this book at all. It's only very short, but the writing style wasn't working for me. I was confused. I didn't know what was going on. I think the point of this book is that it's meant to be quite experimental. The book starts with us following someone who's riding on a subway train. He's made his mind up that he's gonna end his own life, and then he meets some guy on the train, and they basically have a sexual encounter in the toilets, and I was just a bit confused, why did that just happen? Also, it was written really weird, so I didn't even know that it had happened until it kind of mentioned it a little bit later on. So yeah, that one was just not for me. Put that one down. And then I started reading My Murder by Katie Williams. I think I probably got a quarter of the way into this one. I just wasn't interested in picking it up. I'd keep trying to read it, but it just never grasped my attention that much. I was quite happy just putting it down, never picking it back up again. So I instead read, spoilers for the ending. I'm kind of glad that I didn't carry on with it because I don't think I would have liked that ending. So yeah, they were all my DNFs. Let's get on to the books that I actually finished. So the first one that I read in April was a non-fiction, and it's The Price of Life: In Search of What We're Worth and Who Decides by Jenny Kleeman. So it kind of starts off with looking at the cost of a hitman, the cost of insurance that people get paid out if somebody is murdered. It talks about the criminal compensation that you can get if something happens to a loved one, specifically about 2 different people who died in the same terrorist attack, but how the families were awarded different amounts of money based on the method of how they died. So it's really quite callous to read about. It talks about health, paying for IVF and things like that. So it's all these different aspects of putting a cost on human life or keeping humans alive, and I found it really, really interesting. I listened to this on audio. I really liked how the author has clearly done a lot of research, spoken to lots of different people. One of my favourite bits in this book was when she talks about Silicon Valley, how they claim to do all this charitable work, but they literally have a cost benefit analysis where they kind of allocate money based on the most amount of people that it's going to effect. But how can you then measure which charitable cause is doing the most good? So all of that was really interesting. It wasn't too bogged down in economics or money at all. I've given it like a 4-star. I thought it was a really well researched and really interesting book. The next book that I read is a fiction, and it's The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. So this has been on my TBR for the longest time, and I put it on my 25 books to read in 2025. So that's why I finally read it. I really enjoyed this one. It's basically about a boy called, let's check, Elwood, who is just a really good, wholesome young boy, but he ends up getting caught up in a crime that isn't his fault. So he is sent to this school called the Nickel Academy, which is meant to sort of rehabilitate lost young boys. This school is based on a real life school. I can't just remember the name off the top of my head, but I will put it on the screen here. And it's kind of inspired by that. So in recent years, multiple graves were unearthed, like secret graves, where some of these young boys had been buried there, basically as a result of abuse and neglect whilst being in this school. So we're following our main character Elwood as he's experiencing this horrible school. So it's a tough read. It made me cry towards the end. What I will say is, even though it is talking about a lot of dark topics, the actual writing itself isn't overly violent or anything. Some of the violence happens off page, or it's just kind of, you're told that that's happened but you don't see it. But I really just love the writing in this. I love the setup, and our main character Elwood just feels like such a lovely real person. And yeah, like I said, I did cry at the end. I've given this book a 4-star. I wouldn't say it's a new favourite for me, but yeah, I'm not a big historical fiction reader, so I was really happy that I enjoyed this one. Next up, we've got one that I read on my Kindle, and it's called The Membranes by ta-wei. Maybe, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce the name. It's basically about a girl who lives under a membrane under the sea. So it's set in a world where there's been lots of climate change, ecological disasters, where living on land is just not feasible for humans anymore, and people have had to move under the sea. She basically works in this skin clinic where she's like a beautician, and it's very like luxuriously written around that part. But most of this book is kind of reflecting on her past and her childhood and growing up. But then there is a sci-fi kind of twist to this book, which should have been more interesting for me. Something just didn't quite work. I feel like I would have loved this book if it was maybe written in a different way. Like, I love the idea of it so much, but I couldn't give it more than like a 3-star because I just felt like I wasn't quite getting it. But I do think a lot of people would probably quite like this book, and I didn't predict where this book was going to go, so that's a good thing. If I've not said already, I gave that one 3 stars. Next up, I finally read Eliza Clark's She's Always Hungry. So this is her debut short story collection. So I had very high hopes for this because I love boy parts, I loved penance, and overall by the end I did quite like this book a lot, but I did have a bit of a wobble towards the middle. So the first few stories didn't really do much for me. They reminded me of other books or other stories that I've read before, and they didn't feel like super original. But then I think it started to pick up for me a little bit when I read The Shadow Over Little Chitaly. So in that story we're reading lots of different like reviews, as if they're like Just Eat reviews of a takeaway that's a Chinese / Italian takeaway, and that one was really weird and really funny and was kind of what I was hoping for from Eliza Clark. I really like her humour and her tone in her books, so that one kind of brought it back for me. Then there were quite a few sci-fi leaning stories that I just wasn't really into. I felt like I should have been, because I do quite like a sci-fi twist to a story, especially like a horror story. I wasn't loving them. There was a short story called Hollow Bones that I literally just stopped. I think I read something else in between, or I maybe like went back and reread it from the start after a few days, because I don't know, I was almost gonna DNF this book. So yeah, I did go back to it, and then the next story, Goth Girlfriend, kind of brought it back. So that was more rooted in contemporary, which is what I'm used to from Eliza Clark. And then my 2 favourite stories in this collection came towards the end. So one of them was called Shake Well, which was about a girl who was like a teenage girl at school, but she's got this much older boyfriend who is clearly not a nice guy, and she's having some issues with her skin. So she asks him to get her some illegal skincare products that are on the dark web. So we're kind of following like that bit, like the horror of that, but also the horror of her situation where she's just with this guy who is completely like should not be with her, and how she's so naive and vulnerable to that. I really liked the way that it was written. It felt like a genuine teenage girl. And then my absolute favourite one was called called The King. So that one was about a vampire who was just living in hiding amongst normal humans, and then there's some kind of big disaster that happens. As everyone's kind of freaking out about it, this vampire is secretly buzzing. It really reminded me of like American Psycho because this character is just insane. I was laughing out loud multiple times at some of the things that this character would say and the kind of direction that it goes. I just loved it. I literally would have read like a full-length novel just about this vampire who was like so gleeful about the world ending and how they could then like take over from that point. So yeah, I feel like I've just waffled a little bit there, but I've given it 3.75 stars. So there were some highs and there were some lows, but I feel like that's kind of the same for every short story collection. For some reason, I just assumed that I would probably like every single one in this book, and that wasn't the case. The actual title story, She's Always Hungry, was probably my least favourite, to be honest. I just wasn't in love with the way that that one was written. It was about like a fishing village, and all the characters were referred to by like whose child they were and whose cousin they were, and it was just really confusing. And again, it reminded me of other things that I'd read before. But overall, I enjoyed it. I would recommend it. And I will still read everything that Eliza Clark writes. I just think she's very unique and I just really get on with her humour. So yeah, that's She's Always Hungry. This next one is probably a new favourite for me actually, and it's Beastings by Benjamin Myers. It's basically about a girl who has taken a baby. She's run off through the Lake District in northern England and she's being pursued by a priest, a corrupt priest, and a poacher. So it's a little bit of a cat and mouse between them, but then it's also just a like survival story. I had a really good time with this. I could not stop reading it. It's written in a very interesting way where we've got no speech marks. Some of the writing is very like long drawn on sentences. It's very descriptive. It reminded me a lot of Cormac McCarthy. I recently read The Road and it did kind of give me those vibes. The writing was really good. I loved the like dialogue between the priest and the poacher because they just do not get on and they have very different views. So I really loved like their bits. I was really rooting for this girl and this baby. It gets really tense towards the end. It was really fast paced, but it also had this like beautiful nature writing, but also like a terrifying side of nature. Like for me, the Lake District is like an idyllic, peaceful place, but this book really makes it into like a dangerous place to be, especially during this time period. It's quite dark. There are quite a lot of trigger warnings in this. There's quite a lot of just a bit gross things going on. And then we get to a very dramatic ending, which I'm still not sure about. It's a very shocking end to this book and it's not what I would have picked as the ending, but it was definitely very impactful. Like my jaw fell when I read it. So yeah, this book has definitely like stuck with me since I read it a few weeks ago. It gave me American Gothic Southern vibes but set in England. I also recommended it a lot to my boyfriend. He's read it, he really enjoyed it as well. I think it just comes across as a very like accomplished writing style. Like I think this guy is probably, I mean I think he's won some awards. Yeah, prize winning author, winner of the Portico Prize for Literature. So it's definitely a very well written book. I've given it 4.5 stars because I don't really have anything negative to say about it. There were just a couple of points towards the end where I kind of questioned why that was what happened. But other than that, I had a really good time with it. Just please do be careful going into it because it's a lot. Next up, we have another non-fiction. So this is Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Carolien Criado Perez. So this is another very well researched, intelligent non-fiction book. I do love listening to non-fiction books. I feel like they process in my head a bit better that way. So this one, again, split into like lots of different sections about how women are disregarded, not thought about in society and in the decisions that are made about humanity. It definitely raised a lot of interesting points. Some of it that was relevant to me and I've never really thought about it in that way before, but definitely things that I've just been kind of conditioned not to question. But then I did find some of the points a little bit, I don't know how to like word this, but maybe where I was a bit like, okay, so what? Like, is that really the biggest issue we have? But I do also think that that is internalized misogyny. So it did make me think a lot, and it also made me like check my own privilege as well. And the main point of this book is that it might not be malicious, but women are seen as like the other, whereas men is like the norm. And a male body and a male mind is like the normal human experience, whereas a woman is like a little bit different to that, so they're not as considered. And I did agree with a lot of it. I've given this book again like a 4 star. I did find that some of the calls to action action were a bit repetitive, especially like at the end of every chapter they were all very similar, but overall I really enjoyed it and I definitely would recommend it. Okay, then after that I read a couple of thrillers because I've not read thrillers much this year. I'm not having much luck with them, so I went into a trusted author for me, John Mars, and I read The Marriage Act on my Kindle. So this is kind of the third book in a universe made by John Mars. It starts with The One, and then I think The Passengers is the second one, and then The Marriage Act is the third one. You don't need to read these in order. They do kind of spoil the other books, but we're not following the same characters or anything like that. In this book, basically marriage has been completely revamped. People that are married are given lots more privileges because they are seen as sort of better members of society. You get access to better housing, better cars, better life basically. And we're following, as with the other books, lots of different perspectives of people in this society to sort of look at different parts of this world. Lots of the characters in this book were especially like annoying. They weren't very likable. We're following one in particular who's a wannabe influencer. She basically discovers that posting controversial things helps her in the algorithm, gets her lots more followers and sponsorships and free things. So she very much leans into that and starts appearing on the news, but it's having such a detrimental effect on her family. But she doesn't really care because she just wants that fame from being an influencer. So that kind of character was super annoying to read about, but they're all really interesting stories. I liked how it was very fast paced because every time you finished a chapter, you just wanted to know what was going to happen next. I've given it 3.5 stars overall. I think I gave The Passengers 3.5 as well, but The One was my favourite. I gave that one 5 stars. I loved it. But yeah, it was an enjoyable read. I'm glad I read it. I read it very quickly, so that's always a good thing. And then the next thriller that I read, I did enjoy this a little bit more. This is The Return of Ellie Black by Emiko Jean. So in this book we're following Ellie Black, who went missing and has recently been returned home. We're also following a police detective who worked on the case and basically wants to put the guy who did it in prison, but Ellie is not very cooperative. She doesn't really want to speak to the police. It seems that she's hiding something. We're following the police detective as she's trying to solve this case with or without Ellie's help, and then we're also following from Ellie's point of view where she's looking back on when she was missing, how she was taken and what happened to her. I did like how it all came together in the end. It came to a very sort of explosive head, twists that I didn't see coming, and this one did actually make me cry at the end. It's kind of reflecting on the trauma that everyone has been through throughout this whole case, and yeah, I just started crying. That's one thing that I think this book did really well, was the emotional impact of what's been going on. I feel like it took a very trauma informed approach to this story, so yeah, I really enjoyed it. I would definitely recommend it. Next up, I did a really shocking attempt at a 24-hour reading challenge and it just did not work. I don't think my brain is capable of concentrating for that length of time. I could barely even start it. It was that overwhelming. But the first book that I read on the day that I was going to do that challenge was White Nights by Fyodor Dostoevsky, the guy who wrote Crime and Punishment. Basically, I found this in Waterstones for £3. It's a very, very teeny tiny book, and it actually contains 2 short stories. So it has White Nights and it has Bobok. I don't have any interest in reading Bobok, but yeah, I read White Nights. So this book is basically following 2 very lonely characters who cross paths one night and basically just share their stories and develop quite a close bond over the coming nights. It's only 87 pages, and like I said, it's a teeny tiny little book, so it's very, very quick. I read it all in one go. Although I liked where it went, I liked the sort of ending of the story. I liked the female main character in this book, Nastenka. I really liked her. I liked her story, but our main character was quite annoying, to be fair. He was full on. I thought his kind of feelings were a little bit much, but I thought he was sweet. I thought he had good intentions. He was just a lot, and reading from his perspective in like pages and pages of him just talking was a little bit annoying. So when we did get to sort of Nastenka's perspective, I did enjoy that much more, and I did like her story much more. It was nice, it was sad, but I haven't really thought much about it since I read it, so I've given this one like a 3-star, just because it was okay. It was good. I'm glad I read it, but it didn't really do much more for me than that. And then later on the same day, I read Helpmeet by Naben Ruthnum. perhaps. Again, I'm really sorry about the pronunciation in this video. This one is another short story, and this is a horror gothic kind of story. We're following a wife who's looking after her ill husband. He's got this like horrific condition where his body is essentially just rotting. He does not look the same that he used to. His face is completely unrecognisable. So there is quite a lot of grotesque body horror writing in this book about how she has to take care of him and what he looks like. It's not pleasant. But I won't lie, I didn't really get it. I honestly don't really remember the story. I remember it got weird. I didn't feel interested in it. I didn't feel invested in them or the characters, individuals. The weird stuff I didn't really get either. I just didn't really like it. I ended up giving this one a 2-star, but I do feel like it could maybe work for some other people, but for whatever reason, for me, I was kind of bored, to be honest. That 24-hour reading challenge was an absolute flop anyway, so maybe I was just in a bit of a mood, but I didn't like it. It's probably like one of my least favourite books that I've read this year so far. So next up, I did a reread, and I'll go grab the actual book. So I reread The Hunger Games this month, but I did actually read another sort of edition of it. I read the one that is part of this like special edition collection. Obviously Sunrise on the Reaping has come out and it has been getting like hype reviews. I wasn't really interested in reading The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes because that one kind of had mixed reviews and I thought it might be a bit of a cash grab, but that story like with Haymitch is much more interesting to me, so I was like, oh, I will read that one actually. But I'd always said that I wanted to reread The Hunger Games again anyway, and oh my god, it was so nice to go back to this world. The first time that I read The Hunger Games was when I was probably about 15 maybe. I remember at the time it was like groundbreaking for me. Like, this series was insane. I rewatched the films quite a lot, but it was so nice to just read something that brought me back to that like teenage excitement about a dystopia. The Hunger Games is like so fast paced, and because I've never reread it, the films became the story for me. So it was so nice to go back and just see like the extra things or things that have been changed for the films. It was nice to see Katniss as a little bit more naive and a bit more childlike, I guess, than she is in the film. When they're in the carriage going up to like the Capitol during the night where they all like go up in their costumes, she's literally like waving and blowing kisses to the audiences, but in the film she definitely does not do that. So it was nice to see like the differences there, but also it was nice to have Peter back. I friggin' love Peter. I love their relationship. I loved everything. It was so good. I gave this 5 stars when I first read it. I would give it 5 stars again now. I'm currently reading Catching Fire. I'm halfway through it and we basically just got to the Capitol. I didn't realise how much of this book is like the lead up to that, but yeah, there's been a lot of sort of build up about the resistance and the rebellion, so I am absolutely loving my time rereading these, and also hopefully I can finish Mockingjay before the end of June as well, because yeah, after White Nights and after Helpmeet I was just like, oh, I need something that's going to excite me again, and The Hunger Games definitely did. After that, what did I read after that? Going back to a little bit of a downer, unfortunately. I read Into the Fire by g.d.Wright. I feel a little bit like torn with this because I read this author's debut novel before it was like traditionally published, but it was called A Parent Apart when I read it, and I think it's been republished as like After the Storm. But I really enjoyed that book. I gave it 5 stars when I read it in like 2022. I could definitely see like the potential in this author, and I was really happy that he was going to be like traditionally published. And then this is his second book. I managed to get a copy on NetGalley. It started off really well. We're following a couple who were on a night out with their friends, like their best friends, and on the way home they come across a house fire, and our main character, can't remember his name, Steve I think, he runs into this house fire and basically becomes a bit of a hero in the town. So that happens like right at the start. I didn't read the blurb before I went into it, but it takes a hell of a long time to get to where it says you're going to be in the blurb. But basically he becomes a suspect in a old investigation that happened in this town. So firstly he's been like publicised as this hero, and then next minute he's being publicised as like a suspect and a killer. We're following Steve a lot throughout this and how that has like turmoil on him and his family. Firstly, I'll go into things that are like completely non-spoilery, and then I might do a little bit of a spoiler section. But I didn't love the writing in this book. I felt like it was overdone in some places. There was like an overuse of similes or like very similar sentences, like talking about the same thing like one after another, and that was like drawn out, like to the point where I was skimming over some of them because it was just done that often. It felt like filler. It felt like it was bulking up the story, and this is quite, it's not a long book, but it's definitely longer than average now, and it could have been cut back by like maybe 100 pages. And I don't know if this is just me, but I felt like we were being forced to side with Steve the whole time because we've been set up to think that he's this really good man and we're meant to sort of be invested in him throughout this, and I just found myself not rooting for him. We are going to go on to spoilers now, so here's your warning if you are wanting to read this book. But I really did not like the way that he was dealing with what happened. We do also follow from the victim, like the murder victim's dad in this book, and seeing his perspective and like how hurt he is versus Steve, who's just like living his life. Like, you know, he is involved, like he's linked through DNA, and he just won't say why. He gives no comment interviews, whereas we're seeing the victim's dad just like in absolute turmoil about what happened to his daughter. Steve obviously knows. He's just being so selfish in this situation, and he keeps talking about like his family and how it's going to ruin his family if like he says what he knows. What about the victim? What about her family? He doesn't give a shit about that. I didn't really like him. I wasn't rooting for him to like get away with anything, because I thought, well, no, you've actually like kept this in for a long time and you're doubling down on it now. I don't like that. But yeah, things just really slowed down in the middle. Like the pacing was pretty damn slow. It does then pick up towards the end. I did have an idea of where it was going to go. I didn't realise it was going to go that far though. Like the ending was pretty shocking, but I did find myself rolling my eyes at what some of these characters were doing. Like somebody that you wouldn't expect to become involved gets themselves involved, and then it all kind of like wraps up in a nice bow. Steve is able to take some accountability, but then just gets away with it, like gets the lightest thing ever, and I just didn't like it. Like it was all a very happy ending, and I just didn't think that was right. I didn't think it was fair. But like I said, I wasn't rooting for Steve, and I think the whole point of like the setup is that you are team Steve, but I wasn't. I was team victim's dad. Can't remember his name. I just didn't like it. I didn't like it. That's my thoughts. I've given it like a 2.5. I do feel kind of bad putting it down, but I have to be honest and just say that unfortunately this one didn't work for me as well as the first one did. Let's move on to the last book that I read recently. It's called Disney High: The Untold Story of the Rise and Fall of Disney Channel's Tween Empire by Ashley Spencer. So this one is a really interesting look at why Disney Channel became so successful, and it felt very nostalgic. It was very fun to read because I grew up in that era of the Disney Channel where we watched like Lizzie McGuire, That's So Raven, Hannah Montana, Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. It was on every morning before school, every day after school. We were basically raised on the Disney Channel. It was so fun to just go back and like see the insider goss about what was going on. It does start a little bit before my time, so it talks about like Even Stevens, which I don't think I ever really watched. Oh, and it does talk about like the Mickey Mouse, is it like Clubhouse as well? But yeah, it really does kick off with like Lizzie McGuire and the success of that. Talks about High School Musical, and I really like just seeing the sort of creative process behind these shows, how they like cast them, how they were produced, and sort of the backgrounds of the main actors, their situations with being child actors. So I just had a lot of fun listening to this. It was a nice easy read. It gave me all of the like nostalgic feelings and all the celebrity gossip culture that as a Virgo I just love. I did give this one a 4-star because I felt that as the book went on it did become a little bit less thorough, or maybe I got a little bit less interested, like when it goes on to like Demi Lovato, Jonas Brothers, Camp Rock, that kind of era. And then I don't really remember it talking about like why it kind of fell off so much. Like it was such a big thing, like these stars were massive at the time. Is it even still running? I don't even know. So it didn't really go into much about like why that was the case, or not that I can remember anyway. So yeah, I think that is all the books that I want to talk to you about today. So that's everything that I read in April, May and June. The only other books that I will be finishing are going to be Catching Fire and Mockingjay. But yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for making it this far in. If you are still here, please do give this video a like if you enjoyed it so that I know. And leave me a comment, let me know if you've read any of these books before and what you thought of them, or if you do want to read any of them now. Please do subscribe if you want to see more from me, and I will hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!